Hey, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen, the editor and VP of Streaming Media and the program chair for Streaming Media Connect. When we did our first Streaming Media Connect virtual conference back in May 2020, I don't think we thought we'd be still doing them in spring of 2021, but here we are. So it's all blurred into one big long year now. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Really glad to have you here. We have 2 full weeks of panels, presentations, and workshops, and I hope to see you at as many of them as you can make. I hope everyone out there is staying warm, staying safe, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us. This week, we've got panels and presentations on everything from technical topics like video quality, which we'll be talking about in the next hour, encoding and ATSC 3.0, to strategy and business focused topics like advertising, live streaming, sports streaming, and we'll wrap things up with a future looking panel predicting what OTT might look like in 5 years. So with that, let's move forward. Before we kick off this session, I'd like to thank our diamond sponsor for all of Streaming Media Connect, and that's Limelight Networks. Thank you to Limelight for sponsoring the entire week of Streaming Media Connect this week. And also thank you to our sponsor for this particular session, Akamai. And Akamai's Will Law will be one of our speakers on today's session. Speaking earlier, as I was, about staying warm, one person who is unfortunately not staying warm right now is Jason Tebow, who was scheduled to moderate this panel. He's dealing with the effects of the storm and the cold down in Texas where he lives. I hope he's staying safe. And I appreciate our contributing editor, Tim Siglin, stepping in to moderate the next panel, which really focuses on an issue that is central to what we're all doing here, and that's the issue of video quality. Obviously, over the course of the last year, with the pandemic and people being locked in, we're all watching more video than ever before, and we're all expecting more and better quality from that video. And so our panel for the next hour or so is going to talk about all the things that define video quality, OTT quality, from encoding and transcoding to delivery to the user experience, as well as what that means from the perspective of content providers, making sure their audiences get the best quality experience that they possibly can. So with that, I would like to introduce Tim Siglin, who is a contributing editor for Streaming Media and is also the CEO of Help Me Stream Research Foundation, which helps companies and organizations in developing countries get online with their streaming efforts. And with that, I'll pass it to Tim. Tim.
Hey, Eric, thank you for having me on here. And our thoughts go out to JT and all those in Texas who just aren't used to handling snow and ice. We've got a really good panel this morning. I'm just going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, say a little bit about their time in the industry and the company that they're with. Ian, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Sorry about that, fighting with mute, although you'd imagine that by now we're all very accustomed to how to get off of mute as opposed to the pantomime.
Exactly.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all those in the audience. My name's Ian Greenblatt. I'm the managing director and GM of the technology, media, and telecommunications business at JD Power. We've been doing this for 53 years, representing the voice of the consumer back to customers, back to companies they do business with. I come to the business. Wow. I was struck by the introduction, by Eric's introduction, in that this is 2021. And I recall being a panelist at the 2000 Streaming Media West conference, and I think that was somewhere out west, San Francisco. So I come to this, honestly, I've been in the game a little bit. I come from this from the video on demand side, having led strategy and research and development at a couple of different places. One of them was Motorola. And so I'm eager to talk about it. I'm probably going to be a little different than my very esteemed colleagues here from the hardcore streaming side of things, in that I'm going to focus more on the quality of the experience of the consumer, the perceiver of the experience, as opposed to the streamer or the content owner.
And we'll definitely come back to that topic. If you were at the 2000 event back then, we were having the discussions about Real Player versus Windows Media versus early QuickTime, San Jose Convention Center. I remember those. So, and Will, we're going to go to you next. I actually met you in an industry prior to when you came to the company you're with now, with a company called It's Obvious, which was part of those initial discussions. So Will, tell us a little bit about yourself.
You have a very good memory there, Tim. In fact, yeah, I left that company very quickly, just started my own startup, and we spent all our marketing budget on buying a little table at one of the very first early 2001 streaming media conferences. I think it was San Jose. So certainly a lot's changed since then. I now have been at Akamai for the last 14 years. I'm chief architect in the Edge Technology Group. Akamai, most people will know as a CDN. We're a large global provider of distributed compute. We just reorged last week, so I had to say my title carefully. We divided into the Edge Technology Group, which is the group most concerned with this panel, delivering media, game downloads, software downloads, and websites, applications, APIs. And then the other side of the company is our security technology group. We're starting to do an awful lot around security, and unfortunately, it's the dark side of all the goodness that's happening on the other side of the business. So I've been involved with streaming media for a long time. I've worked as past president of the Dash Industry Forum, so a lot with MPEG Dash. I currently chair the CTA Wave project, which is a group looking to improve some of the remaining hurdles in OTT. CTA also issued one of the first standards I know of on QoE, a standardization of QoE metrics, which we'll get to maybe later in this. And then I recently took a new position as co-chair of the W3C's Web Transport Working Group, which is sort of a next-gen transport protocol for the web. So
Nice.
all in all, happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
I guess since you don't have to make that commute, you've got a lot of time to go into all these other things. You know, you've always been sort of somebody who has a lot on their plate. That sounds like almost an overwhelming plate to me, just personally. CJ, we're going to go to you next. And what's nice about this panel is we've got some technical and some more focused on sort of the consumer side. As Ian mentioned, where do you sort of fall in that particular category?
Definitely on the consumer side. So I'm the VP of product management for the entertainment product at HBO Max. Joined a couple of years ago, was the first product hire on that team. Really honored to be a part of the HBO legacy and figuring out how we, as it was said a long time ago, I think by Stampede, widen the aperture of the content that's created so that we're able to sort of, continue to highlight the current breadth and depth, but also extend into additional audiences. So that's really what HBO Max launch was about. That's where we were focused and going through the holidays and super excited to share Wonder Woman with the world. A lot of really creative things that are coming next as we both focus on scale as well as experience.
Good deal. Well, look forward to your insights on this. And then finally, Robert, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your time in the industry.
Yeah, my name is Rob Colatoni. I come from a CDN background. I worked for 8 years as a principal architect at Limelight Networks. I came to Disney about 8 months ago, primarily to focus on performance, primarily on the CDN, on the content delivery distribution side of the house. But we look at performance holistically across our organization, and so it's a very collaborative approach, and we end up working hand in hand with a lot of the folks on the front end quality side of the house as well. Primarily, in my interests are surrounding next gen transport protocols, which I'll mention a little later, and then some of the open standards things that we're working on is surrounding like open caching in both the capacity context and sharing capacity information back and forth between CDNs and distribution providers, and configuration management. So how do we solve the problem by which we're delivering in a multi-CDN environment, and we need to translate our configuration to multiple vendors. So don't really relate to quality of experience, but those are some of the things that I'm traditionally working on.
Well, and performance obviously is a huge issue for you all as you've grown very rapidly. The numbers that were announced, I think last week, were basically you hit your 4-year mark in a very short period of time. So the scalability, as you say, is a key factor.
Correct.
So Ian, I'm going to start off with you. Is sort of the overarching. We've talked about two terms in here: quality of service, quality of experience. Quality of service is something that traditionally the pay TV operators have focused on, and quality of experience is something that the streaming operators working on. Give us a bit of a definition of the similarities and differences on those two terms.
Sure. I'm sure if you asked each one of us to define those terms, I'm certain we'd all have different,
I may just
mostly different ones. I'm sorry, it's the lawyer in me coming out. I have to hedge every bet. And please don't hold that against me. Quality of experience versus quality of service. Quality of service, and again, I come from the cable world, right? I sold video on demand servers to cable companies. And so it was always making sure that they were quite literally bulletproof. And so underlying the quality of service aspect, my own personal opinion would be that Five9's reliable, that never a macro block ever, that audio and video in perfect sync every time, just highest playback experience at the highest possible bit rate with no stutters. That would be in my mind the quality and reliability aspect, right, of quality of service. And I think these, by the way, are overlapping circles in the Venn diagram. The larger circle around that, I think, is quality of experience, and that's where we move into things in addition, not aside from, but in addition to that hardcore, outstanding, ultra high quality streaming, is the UI, is the search, discover, recommend, fulfill, all of the dark magic, right? All of the little boxes on the functional diagram that is presenting a fantastic experience in next generation television, which is what I think all of this comes down to. That's in my mind the quality of experience. Pulling all of those fairly difficult, each one of those things is fairly difficult to execute really well. Pulling all of those together in a completely seamless and invisible way, and delivering that total package to the consumer, that to me is quality of experience.
And I know quality of service used to go hand in hand with SLA, service level agreements, making sure that there were guarantees of bandwidth and delivery. Quality of experience, as you say, the user experience. So what happens at the user's end? Rob, do you have a take on that? I mean, Ian said everybody would have a different definition of it, so let's test that theory.
Yeah, no, he's 100% correct. No, we all have different. In fact, within Disney streaming itself, we have different terminology for it in different areas. But we will generally apply a term like quality service to the underlying delivery components that make up the holistic, experience that the viewer sees. Whereas quality of experience metrics, we typically quantify as being, the authoritative end user experience, things like a rebuffer, things that are experienced by the user, quality of the actual video, those sorts of things. Whereas then we'll build out underlying quality of service KPIs for components upon which that is built. So for example, we'll have a quality service KPI for something like the average client throughput on each CDN. Now, the quality of experience metrics that we're dealing with there is like the average bit rate selected by the client when they're, when the player is playing back the video. Now, you could be in a situation where the underlying quality of service KPI is slightly higher or lower per CDN. But it doesn't ultimately affect the average bit rate selected based on, perhaps like the bit rate ladder being, sufficiently separate from each other. And it doesn't actually cause a quality of experience degradation, right? So we're always weighing, we can look at this is what we do in a multi-CDN environment. We look at each individual CDN from a standpoint of both their quality of service metrics, but ultimately the authoritative metrics for us are the quality of experience metrics. We want to understand that, we want to build towards that ultimate end user experience. And if a particular CDN is maybe delivering slightly faster than all the other CDNs, but it doesn't make an impact on the quality of experience metric, well, then that QoS metric doesn't necessarily matter to us, right?
And those KPIs are key performance indicators. So those something that Disney's decided in-house, or those are sort of industry standard that you're benchmarking against?
Well, I think we're going to get into this later. I think we'll let Will talk about industry standards on that front, but I'm not sure that there is a ton of industry standards on those as far as there are just de facto standards based on vendors being utilized by across the board by customers, right? So we could call out Conviva, for example. They have their own notion of what CIR, VST, and VPF are. But I don't, and I'll defer to some of the other panelists, but I don't know if we've really done a good job of creating like an open standards which defines each of these individual metrics as it should be measured. It really differs between which tool you're ultimately using to measure.
Okay, all right. Will, I actually was going to come to you with another question anyway. So do you want to just talk a little bit about the standard side of what you all are attempting to do?
Yeah, I can. I mean, just to answer Robert's question, there is actually a standard that defines the QoE metrics. So I think the ITU came up with a great definition of quality of experience. They said it's quantifying the degree of delight or annoyance that the consumer receives with a stream. And I think that, yeah, that's excellent. It's like how happy or how frustrated are you with this? And we put metrics like rebuffer rate, video start time, etc. And every analytics provider has a different way of calculating rebuffer rate. What's the denominator you're using? Is a rebuffer rate over the last 5 minutes, 1 minute? If you rebuffer for 1 second, does it count as much as a 5-second rebuffer? These are all variables, and they end up with very different numbers when, like Disney, you're comparing across providers or collecting data from multiple sources. So I was one of a number of unfortunate souls who spent 3 years of our life coming up with a standard. It's CTA 2066. I think that's the number. No one knows about it, but it actually attempts to define things like how do you calculate rebuffer rate. And Conviva actually led some of the definitions, and a number of people involved. So check that out. I'm not arguing in any way it's deployed, but I think we can take that as a basis, expand upon it, an improvement, but there is a movement on the QoE side. And I agree with both Ian and Robert. QoS are typically metrics that you can measure as a CDN. How long it took to deliver an object, what's my time to first byte. And these have an impact on QoE, but QoE on the player is not only the sum total of the QoS, because great QoS can still be ruined by a bad player bitrate selection or just too much stuff happening in the player's compute environment and it can't perform. And likewise, bad QoS can be compensated for by a well-written player that's doing whatever it can to survive despite the terrible experience it's receiving. So it's an interesting balance between the two. And we're looking more at how we give CDN data to the player and player data to the CDN. So there's two silos of metrics can now be merged, because a lot of them are causal. Poor QoS does often lead to poor QoE, and it's nice to be able to track it back and resolve it in real time.
Good. That's actually a really good insight. CJ, so the one of the questions is sort of design and available features of a streaming platform and what impact that has on QoE. Do you want to take that one?
Sure, and I actually really enjoyed listening to Ian and Will talk. I do feel like my job a bit is somewhat in the dark arts, because while I would love for it to be wildly quantitative and you can trust at HBO Max, we find, we are definitely data driven. Will, to your point, that concept of measuring things based on a user's delight or annoyance is tricky, right? It's kind of a slippery metric. One of those things that we want to really reinforce is making sure the user has trust in whatever's going to happen next, and they understand when they click something, they know exactly what's going to happen. So it's very simple, like making sure play CTAs are very clear that the video player is going to load, making sure you have great metadata coverage for things like skip intro, so someone isn't binging through a series and then all of a sudden doesn't immediately go to season 4, episode 5. From a quality of experience perspective, folks don't understand that the CDN was kicking and there wasn't any rebuffering or latency in the video feed they just think the video player isn't working because they didn't get their next episode. Even as far as sort of managing viewers' expectations around things like bitrate and where they're going to be streaming, giving them optionality and control to say, I'm not interested in a super premium experience right now, or I perhaps would take that lower experience to avoid any potential buffering moments. Thinking specifically about streaming on mobile, all of these things are some of the tricks we have in our bag to just help the user know exactly what they're going to expect, to the extent possible, have control over that, and sort of by establishing that common baseline and that trust, we think we have a better opportunity to sort of deliver some of that delight and avoid the annoyance.
It's interesting you mentioned the binge watching issue. I think there's the issue of, as you say, jumping into other seasons or episodes. I think there's also the issue, and I've noticed this personally. If I'm binge watching episodes of a series and the encoding feels off between, 2 or 3 episodes back to back, my brain's immediately going to, is it a QoE issue or is it a problem with the way that the initial encoding was done? The average consumer would just feel like they weren't getting the full quality of experience from that standpoint. And I think that's part of what you're saying here too, is users expect that consistency across the board.
Correct.
Okay. So speaking of that, Rob, the one of the questions around streaming quality is sort of resiliency and consistency. What's your take on that, and how do we sort of balance those two? Because obviously a CDN may be having a bad day and that's impacting the quality of experience for viewers. How do we sort of balance those two parts?
Yeah, I mean, it's without a doubt, there's always one CDN having a bad day, right? It sucks. Your heart goes out to them whenever it happens. But we exist, and the way that CDN or the way that delivery operators get around that is we operate in like a multi-tenant environment, a multi-CDN environment. And so, I guess the first and foremost, your CDN selection, right, matters greatly. And you can't just look at the quality service metrics. You also have to look at the various statistical properties of those metrics. So not only are they delivering at the KPI or below, meeting your KPIs, but what is their standard deviation? If they're meeting your KPIs, but they are significantly varying up and down in that quality, especially when you're looking at like from a peak to trough on a daily cyclical type of basis, which could indicate some sort of backbone contention or those sorts of things. You need to take those into account. And then also, they can vary greatly by region. So we'll typically do a mix of CDNs, but there are certain CDNs that have better peering in certain regions, and other CDNs that aren't as good in individual regions. And so you select for the CDNs that have the most capacity, which is, oftentimes affecting your reliability at peak in those regions. And then also, you shift between those as best you can. The other thing you can do for like reliability as far as streamwise goes is, your bitrate ladder, and your encoding process matters a lot, right? Too tight of a range, you're going to end up shifting up or shifting down too frequently, which, does have an impact on the CDN. Sometimes it's a new connection to a different edge box, depending on how they shard your content. And then third, you can do things like kind of next level encoding features like scene adaptive encoding, right? So they're streaming at a higher average bit rate, so they're getting a better quality, but then you're dropping your chunk size for scenes that don't necessarily need that high of a quality, and that eases your pressure on like the player side buffer, right? So those are kind of 3 items that you can kind of hit from a streaming platform side that overall kind of give you a little leeway on the consistency and resiliency side.
Very good. Yeah. Eric, do we have any questions from the audience? We're going to pause
we
here.
do have a few. Yeah, we do have a few questions here. And of course, there's a lot of discussion around what exactly QoE is versus QoS. And I know we've covered that topic in some depth, but I think this one is relevant. Is QoE to be considered as applicable across the media supply chain, where the supply chain is a series of handoffs as video feeds are edited to produce content and programming that's then distributed? Or is QoE something being applicable exclusively around the last mile? For example, if the OTT downstream performance is great, but the upstream provider has encountered issues and the perfectly encoded video handed off to the CDN has a technical difficulty, would that be considered QoE, QoS? Where does that fall?
I mean, I can start. Those look like QoS problems. They're this quality of the service. In one case, the CDN might be performing, but there's the last mile between it and the player. So it's clearly not the fault of the player here. It's receiving data slowly, and a player that impairment may be sufficient to alter the QoE metrics. Like, does it cause the player to rebuffer? But maybe it doesn't, and maybe it doesn't even switch bit rates. And if the video is encoded poorly, which we often see also causing play break problems, it's not a QoS problem so much, it's an encoding problem, but it will cause a QoE problem because the player might rebuffer because there's missing time, there's non-contiguous media timestamps or something like that.
So along those lines, Will, typically in the press, and hopefully I'm not one of those people who does it, but there's this tendency to go bitrate equals quality, and they're the same thing. Talk to me about those as sort of two different dimensions, because Rob mentioned essentially content aware encoding, where you can keep the quality up but lower the overall bitrate in certain scenes. How do those two things balance with each other?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll get on my soapbox here if I want to stand on that. There's more to quality. Now we're talking user perceived quality. So say your CDN's doing great and your player's great and it's showing content to an end user. What's good quality and bad? A lot of the press immediately associate bitrate with quality. More bitrate gives me better quality. And even you look at player APIs, there's an API, what's called, it doesn't say switch bit rates, it says switch quality level, which I find curious in 2021, it's still there. There are many examples where more bitrate is not better quality. I'll give you two. One is, there's a choice in the playlist manifest. You got 1080p 30 at 10 megs with AVC codec, or you got 1080p 30 at 8 megs with HEVC codec. Which one should you choose? The one with more bitrate? No, your HEVC is going to give you a better quality because the codec is that magical parameter that translates the bits crossing the wire into the visual quality that you receive. So another example, you're sitting on your couch watching your 60-inch television and you got a choice of 4K at 16 megs or 1080p at 8 megs. Which one you choose? Well, it's a trick question because they're both going to look the same to you. But the one costs the provider twice as much as the other to send to the TV. So the player shouldn't choose the more expensive one if it knows the user can't perceive any quality benefit from that. So there's many dimensions to visual quality, and I'll go through some of the other ones. Everyone knows bitrate, we just discussed that. Resolution, it can help. 4K is better than lower K as long as you're close enough and your television has enough visual DPI to consume it. You might look at frame rate. 60 FPS is becoming popular, certainly for sports. It's a real differentiator now. You can actually see the tennis ball moving instead of just imagining the yellow blur. Color volume gives you much clearer colors, going from Rec 709 up to Rec 2020. Color depth, 8-bit, graduations everywhere, 12-bit, much smoother. Dynamic range, we're getting used to having some notion of high dynamic range, be it static or dynamic metadata for that, but standard range doesn't look so good anymore and rather dark. And then we throw on audio as well. Next-gen audio and object-based audio certainly create a more immersive experience. So those are all multiple dimensions of perceived quality that are totally separate from bitrate, and they have to be taken into account from a player. People are trying to work on no reference metrics to estimate from the player's perspective, what would the user see? Is it better that I show a smaller video with a different codec if I turn my phone around, change the aspect ratio? It has to go through a lot of complex calculations, and they're not simple ones for the player to make. So the notion of perceived quality is a much more complex one than this linear relationship to bitrate.
Ian, from your perspective, I mean, obviously, as you said, you kind of come at it from where the consumer might be. Will's just done a really nice job of describing a number of the issues that are faced, but consumers, essentially is it watchable or isn't it watchable? And is it pausing, buffering, et cetera?
Mm.
What's your take on sort of how we deal with bitrate versus quality? Because in the popular press, it seems to be a coexistent correlation.
Right. I first have to say thank you so much to Will for that. In my day-to-day, I don't get to talk about this sort of stuff very often. The bulk of my survey work, my studies, the readouts I do are largely the wireless and wireline consumer perception, right? So, and most consumers are not like the folks on this panel or the folks in the audience. We're all sort of broken, right? We know exactly what each and everything has gone wrong, with every tiny error we see, we're picking up the phones. Oh, did you see that? Consumers don't see that. They only know that they perceive something other, something different. And those perceptions, however unfairly, right? These incredibly high quality, these incredibly high quality experiences that Robert and CJ are putting out there, all the way at the consumer facing end of this, they're unfairly judged against every other digital experience. Just think of customer care, right? If you're selling anything, you're not held against your competitors. You're held against the customer care provided by Zappos, right? It's those outsized digital expectations that consumers, the average everyday consumers, are applying to each and every every consumer service they subscribe to. So streaming media is no different. The fact that us thieves here can figure out what exactly has gone wrong, and again, thank you, Will. That was awesome. Consumers aren't so much aware of how it's gone wrong, only that there's something other. I noticed it. It frustrates me, and I'm going to shamelessly steal quantifying the delight or annoyance. I love that expression. That is spectacular. But it's that quantifying delight, and anything other than delight throws up that flag. Wait, well, that's something other. That's something different. I'm not used to it. To put a fine point on it, and I'll stop yammering, I promise. You had said, what is it that they really notice? The most obvious and the most difficult one to get past as a viewer, as a lay viewer, is the audio video sync issue. If my lips don't match the audio I'm hearing, especially with voice, all bets are off.
Okay, fair enough. We're going to get back to a couple questions from the audience, but before we do that, CJ, a quick question for you. Quality is not just about performance. There are obviously subjective elements as well. What are some of the ways that OTT operators can, enhance their platforms? Search may be one way, there may be some other ways. What's your take on that?
How much time do you have?
So.
There's so many ways I could take that. I'll stick with one that's really near and dear to my heart right now, and what we're focused on in the roadmap, and that's really personalization. We have a massive catalog. It is the entirety of Warner Brothers and HBO and TNT and TBS and so much more beyond that. We are fortunate to have a lot of headlines like Wonder Woman and the little things that people come for, but then the question becomes, how do we get you engaged in something else? There's, end cards, and there's heroes, and there's editorial carousels galore. But if you sort of approach it with a one-size-fits-all model, you're only gonna fit some vast subset of your audience, right? So really looking at the signals that we can grab in-app, not even just, what a single individual has watched, but thinking about, collaborative filtering, what other people on the platform are watching, how do we find similarities and lookalikes between your profile and others so we can bubble up something that might be an undiscovered gem for you. I aspirationally want to get beyond just helping you find that next thing you'll love. Sort of in the hierarchy of our homepage right now, if you think about it, we have a massive hero and that's our tentpole, our Wonder Womans or little things, it's probably broad appeal. Immediately after that, we have continue watching, and continue watching, make sure you can get right back into that thing you've already told us you love. So whether you're in the middle of Sex and the City, whether you finished John Oliver last season and forgot that he's coming back next weekend, shameless plug for one of my favorites, that tile will be there front and center for you on the homepage when you come in. Now go a little bit further and start to think about our For You experience and recommendations. It's, I won't say a no-brainer, but most folks could assume someone who likes South Park or Rick and Morty is also going to like Close Enough. Our goal is to go beyond that and sort of get you that next thing you probably would have gotten to anyway, and remind you that we have newsroom on the platform, like really going deep and going obscure. There's so much from like Turner Classic Movies and even some selections from Criterion that we have. It's really about figuring out that right time and that right moment to give you something you might not have known you were looking for, but again, hopefully it's delightful and you click play.
Well, and it's funny, Eric has a background in music, and so there will be times he will send me a message and say, you need to check out this band. That is the level that I want in terms of the algorithmic search, to say, because not just because of the things that I have watched previously, as you said, but also because of the things that I tend to do in the offline world. This will, this particular one will appeal to me. Okay, that's really good.
I really love that you said that. And if I could just wax ecstatic for another minute. Our sort of brand promise at HBO Max is that it's handcrafted by humans, but then powered by technology. We realize that there is nothing we can do in any UI, any recommendation engine, no snipe, no badge, no sizzle, that'll be as powerful as someone you trust saying, hey, check this thing out. And for that reason, we started, with user profiles on the platform. Over time, you're going to see that user profile feature becoming more robust. You will see more elements of humans curating content, not just for everyone. Like if you jump on the platform right now, you'll probably see guest curation by Selena Gomez and a few other stars that we have. Imagine playing that out and finding a space where, because video is inherently a social experience, HBO Max will start to reflect that more in both the UX as well as the recommendations. That's where we think it'll start to get magical.
Very good. Nice. We'll look forward to that. Eric, let's take one or two more questions from the audience, and then we'll come back to my final feedback.
You bet. We've got a number of questions here. I don't know if we'll have time to get to all of them, but we do save the questions after the panel, and we can send them to our panelists and hopefully get some responses that way. The next question we have regards multi-CDN, and Eric Hansen asks, a while back, there were several multi-CDN providers that popped up to compete with Conviva and approached it differently. Where do we see the future of multi-CDN? Are companies developing their own more and more? Or are they turning to third parties? And I really like this part of the question. Some can use third-party QoS to plug into the load balancing decisioning, but is it worth it to layer another cost for this on top of your CDN costs?
Robert, you're smiling, so I'm going to let you take this question.
Yeah. I think it's, you're not going to escape the costs one way or the other. I think that you're either going to build a team that is going to become experts at gathering the QoS, building statistical models of quality of service across the CDNs, across various regions and ASNs and eyeball networks. And you're going to build your own load balancer, or you're going to go to an MCD provider that can ingest those either directly from your own QoS monitoring platform, or again use their own like a Conviva, right? I don't think you implement multi-CDN without engaging or getting those costs layered on top, kind of regardless. I think that for a video platform that is just starting out, I guess the main goal is to build your platform in a way where you can start out utilizing an MCDN vendor, but then when you scale past a certain point and it becomes fiscally tough to scale, you can swap out to your own internal load balancer, build them in parallel. So I guess from the perspective of, the way we do it here at Disney Streaming is obviously we've built our own We do rely on Conviva and other third-party metric gathering, some of our own metrics gathering platforms and Conviva to essentially determine where we balance traffic and how we balance traffic between those CDNs. But we can certainly swap any of those components out at any time, because we've built it in a way where we're thinking about not necessarily being tied to a single vendor, not just for the CDN perspective, but also on the measurement platform perspective, right? You need to build those components to be generic enough and have defined interfaces between them, and that you could, the process of unwinding that platform doesn't become, an engineering nightmare.
Well, and you mentioned, one of the things you mentioned was that certain CDNs play better in certain geographies than others. And I face that on the ground a lot because of what we do with working with NGOs and emerging economies. It's one thing to say, here's how you encode your content. It's another thing to say, here's how you scale out getting that messaging out. You mentioned you had your own internal, and then you have the Conviva, or the decisions that you're making around sort of weighing heavily toward one CDN in a particular geography. Is that based on gut feel, based on previous experience, or based on current KPI?
No, that's based on current KPI. So, we are constantly essentially building. What we built is essentially a relative performance index. So we gather all of our quality of experience metrics, quality service metrics in the case of the CDNs, and then we weight them slightly, and then we come up essentially with a ranked stack ordering per CDN, per region, per ASN. And then based on that, we can determine if any particular CDN is out of band, out of range, deviation from the mean type of aspect. So it needs to be, if you're scaling out, there's just too many eyeball networks for you to do this manually. You can certainly create a preferred order and do it like that initially, but as you're going to scale out, you need to be able to aggregate that data and make those decisions on essentially on an automatic basis.
And Will, from an Akamai standpoint, what impact does this question have, and sort of Rob's take on it, have on architecting to the edge? Because obviously, the edge that you put over the last mile to eliminate some of those potential issues.
Yeah, so firstly, multi-CDN is the new norm. So the days of people choosing one CDN and just running with that are gone for anyone of large scale. And we acknowledge that, and we build our solutions to be competitive. And it's fiercely competitive. If we raise our performance or our performance drops too low, we don't get traffic. So it's good for distribution providers, and it's very competitive for CDNs. But yeah, I want to talk about load balancing, because Disney is very sophisticated in how they load balance. There are an awful lot of companies who are not. You can make load balancing decisions when you start playback, and this is one of the most common ways to do it. And people will make decisions based on agents that they put in data centers that ping the various CDNs, load a single file, time how long it takes, and decide that that's good. It's not a reflection on an individual's user's performance in their home at that point in time. So a lot of those schemes give bad information for the player. The player is really the center of the experience for that session. And it's the player's KPI, the KPI that player is receiving from multiple CDNs, that ultimately is the best predictor of its performance. So that should be taken into account, and like runtime KPIs. And in order to know that, you basically have to sample your CDN. So the worst thing you can do in a multi-CDN world is, with adaptive media, have your player pick segment 1 from one CDN, segment 2 from another, segment 3, segment 4, and round robin your way through it. Because on the CDN, that hurts any notion of prefetching. Prefetching is pulling the next object to the edge, so you get better performance when the player asks for it, because every CDN is wasting its prefetch. And the player will get poor performance because it'll effectively be a cold hit on everyone. So you want to be intelligent. You want to grab a decent chunk of segments from every CDN so that the prefetching kicks in, the edge cache is warm, and you're pulling it. And also pick the same range so that other clients hitting the same edge on the same CDN get the benefit of those segments being pulled. So there's a lot. We don't have enough time to get into all the algorithms, but load balancing is a science, and people should take it very carefully, because at times it won't deliver the performance you want. And the worst thing you can do is fail over everybody to a new CDN. You got cold hits all over the place. You got spikes in traffic, and you can get fluctuations that actually lower QoE at the end of the day.
Very, very good point. Eric, is there a non-technical question that I can toss out to CJ and Ian?
Yeah, and I mean, we've got a number of very technical questions here, more than we're going to have time to get to during the time we have left. But I really like this one because I think it speaks to the delight or annoy question. And Shane Morris is asking, how do you deal with consistency for older digitized original content to the end user? We've all had that experience of coming out of watching Game of Thrones or something and then deciding, I want to watch an old Harryhausen movie. And that's maybe a bad example, but and the difference in quality is so shocking that it's almost difficult to watch sometimes. So how do services deal with that lack of consistency or try to improve the quality of that older digitized content?
And I'll add even adding 4:3 content, because it's amazing to me. I think Disney recently launched, I think, Dinosaurs, which was something from my child. And when I went to watch it, of course, it's in 4:3 aspect, which is the only way that you really should watch it. So that's a really good question, Eric. CJ, Ian, I'm going to open that up to you. How do you sort of balance that piece of really high quality and then nominal quality, because the source content itself may not have been the best?
DJ's
Sure.
got to go first on this one.
I think there's three things, and if I lose track of the third thread in my head, someone please remind me. First is obviously up-resing or remastering. We prefer remastering to up-resing always. If you could imagine just sort of a brute force, everything looks better, but we stretched the 4:3 so it fit a 16:9 and weren't so mindful about what we might have cropped. The Simpsons had a sort of headline Twitter storm worthy moment around up-resing versus remastering. So we do remaster select titles for the platform to make sure people can experience it in all of its premium glory. That said, remastering isn't right for everything. The Fresh Prince, for instance, just watch it in 4:3, it feels great that way. So again, managing expectations from a user experience perspective, making sure the badging and the sort of messaging around what this person is going to get from the asset details perspective is very clear. So when they click play, there's no shock and annoyance based off of a misalignment between expectation and reality. And then I think the third thing is things we can do on our side. This wasn't exactly the question, but I think it's germane and relevant as well. When you think about any of your extra content, behind the scenes, previously on, next on, your occasional promo, ensuring that the quality of all of those sort of sidecars that are going to be playlisted or stitched on to the actual content, A, prevents your player from having to do gymnastics to flip back and forth, and B, also prevents your user from sort of quality whiplash and seeing a promo in 1080, but then all of a sudden the content starts up in 4K. So making sure all of those things are lined up with great messaging so you know what you're going to get, and of course as far upstream as possible doing the remaster or a cautious up-res where appropriate, I think are the three tools that we use at HBO Max to make sure people are getting the best that they can in that moment.
Ian.
I don't know that I can add much there. That was really on the money, other than to echo the concept of managing expectations. CJ hit it exactly on the money. The matchup of expectations, of perceptions and reality is everything. You said it just so right in terms of annoyance. There's nothing more annoying than when you think you're settling in to watch a high quality piece of content and finding it in high signal to, or high noise to signal 4:3, garbage. I'm now thinking of, this happened very recently. Metadata to me is a big deal. And the reason why I'll just make this little pitch, and it has nothing to do with what I do on a daily basis, but I was the metadata guy at Motorola. And metadata mismatches are an absolute easy opportunity to completely annoy customers. And my case in point is I settled in to watch on a platform I'm not going to name, as a gag, an old Howard Hessman titled TV show about a high school and the hilarity that ensues. I think it was called Head of the Class. And again, talking about quality, the show itself, you can't up-res the show itself. You can't go back and fix the content itself. But that said, the reason why I bring this up is because the metadata for the keyframes for each episode was the same picture, but it was the same picture from different episodes. They were all Howard Hessman going. So to me, one of those obvious opportunities to delight as opposed to annoy would be the alignment of metadata to ensure that the quality of experience matches the expectation.
And speaking of metadata, because that's something that I write on a lot and really sort of geek out on, there was a period of time where when we were sort of moving between 4.3 and 16:9, the question was, what do you do with those black boxes on the side? You know, do you letterbox? Do you what have you? Has there been consumer push for that 4.3 content where there are now black bars on the side to have metadata about the show, or more information about the show, or are we as consumers comfortable that we're just narrowing our gaze into that 4x3 box?
This is dated. I haven't done qualitative consumer research on streaming and players in a bit, but back when, no, that was actually a bit jarring. There's a reason why you see letterboxing now. There's a reason why you don't see advertisements or logo down the side, certain sports programming accepted. It's a bit jarring to customers.
Okay, got it. So we have time to sort of take one last set of questions from here, and I'm going to round robin this throughout the. Sorry, Will. I'm actually going to round robin around the panel. In the next 24 months, will streaming operators have a better handle on quality, and why or why not? And Robert, I'm going to start with you because you're sort of the performance guy. As we've talked about the balance of resiliency versus consistency, QoS and QoE, do we feel like the industry itself is going to have a better take on it and understanding even what the definition of those things mean?
Yeah. So I'll take a little bit of time. I'm gonna pitch the CMCD because we didn't get to touch on it a lot in this talk, but I know that it's close to Will's heart, and actually we've been keeping our eye on it, right? So one of the largest pain points in the industry today for us is the communication of consistent quality of experience metrics in a way that allows our partners like CDNs and other stakeholders in the delivery chain to share quality of experience data in a contextual manner, right? So what we're doing internally is we're taking these quality experience metrics and we're munging them together into a single KPI, and we're sharing this with the CDNs, to tell them, like, this is your relative performance in these areas, in these regions, and this is how you're performing, to kind of push them to either interconnect or backbone upgrades, capacity upgrades in those particular regions. But also, that standards push by the CMCD group to essentially bring the player experience back through the HTTP process, through the headers, back to the CDNs and back to ultimately to the providers, is a huge push, and I see it really picking up steam. We've been keeping our eye on it. Thank you, Will. And I think in the next 24 months, I think we're going to see a massive push towards that from content producers and from CDNs themselves.
Okay, very good. And Will, I'll come to you last on that, but I want to get Ian and CJ's take. The next 24 months, do we feel like we'll have a handle on this? Ian, I'll go with you first.
It's only going to continue getting better from my perspective in terms of consumers. Now, granted, again, we talked about this, the unfair outsized digital expectations of consumers will continue apace. However, I think that if the launch of Disney Plus and the launch of HBO Max and the upcoming launch of Paramount Plus has taught us anything, it's you guys are doing a really good job. Your product is high quality, it's top notch, it's creating delight, and so there's no reason to expect that to change. In fact, it's only going to accelerate, I think, in the next 24 months.
CJ.
Plus one to what Ian said for a slightly different reason. we have, because of a number of events in the past year, seen streaming really take center stage. We have also seen folks have a soapbox and a voice and a way to reach out to companies, CEOs, and individuals within that company in a very real way. I was kind of contemplating this when we were talking about standards and benchmarks, because, you know, at HBO Max, all of our standards and benchmarks at the 98th, 99th percentile, but you still have those vocal minorities of people who in either App Store reviews or on Twitter or on Reddit are sharing very valid complaints and concerns about their, I'll call it quality of experience, and we would need a lot more time to unpack what's going on with them to understand what it is. But so many things get buried in averages or even percentiles, and I think people's ability to have a voice and be heard, you know, that feedback loop, heard, processed, and responded to, even to someone with 1,200 followers on Twitter, is doing a lot for our product team and our engineering team to really go dig deeper and go deeper into understanding what some of the specific QoE metrics and sort of experiences are, and how we can not just make sure, you know, the median and mean are great and the 95th percentile, but are we giving a great experience to everyone?
Good, very good insights. Will, I'm going to leave it with you at the end before we hand it off to Eric, but take a minute or two and just describe to us about this initiative and what we as the industry should be looking for as that process moves along.
Yeah, certainly. So I owe Robert a beer for mentioning it. CMCD, or Common Media Client Data, is a spec I chaired and took through CTA. And to be clear, it's a CDN agnostic way. So it's a way for all media players to send data to all CDNs in a standard and consistent manner. And what it does is it ties these separate silos of data we've talked about, the QoS logs, the QoS data we have in the CDN logs, and the QoE metrics we're collecting in the player. We tie them together. It gives the player world the ability to see what might have caused issues on the CDN side. It gives the CDN world real-time and visibility into, are we causing player problems? It's very difficult for us to know that. We see objects being delivered, but they're opaque objects. We don't know if that's hurting or helping the player in most cases. So I'm a real fan of the spec. We don't have enough time to go into it today, but you're starting to see players come out with support right now. You're seeing CDNs, including Akamai and other CDNs, starting to support it. And more importantly, we need the vendors like Disney and the number of others that I'm speaking to are all starting to deploy it. And it's a virtuous circle. The more data flows, the better the quality gets. And I think while the rest of us, it's work and it's hard, the real winners here are the end consumers, people at home watching content. There's certainly, the rebuffer rates are going to go down, the video start times are going to decrease, the incidence of poor behavior is going to decline. And they have declined. I just watched the Super Bowl, CBS online. It was fantastic. Pristine quality. It was just like it should be. And I admit not everyone's getting that experience all the time, but the people who are getting that experience are receiving it at a greater degree of the time. And that has to be a continued effort before it. But a lot of the engineering and business work and the standards work is being done right now to ensure that that happens.
And I concur on the Super Bowl. I remember writing an article probably a decade ago on the Super Bowl streaming fail, and watching this time, the quality was just absolutely stunning. So thank you very much, our panelists, Rob, Will, CJ, Ian. Really appreciate the time that you all have taken on this. Eric, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you so much to everyone. And thank you, Tim, for stepping in to moderate this and doing such a great job. And to our panelists, I do want to say that I've been spending most of the time staring longingly at CJ's t-shirt and looking forward to the time when we can just sit here in t-shirts instead of all of us zipped up in our fleeces and vests here. Maybe we'll just come visit you in Santa Monica. And hopefully Streaming Media West will be in person in Huntington Beach in November. So that's the plan. So thanks to everyone again. I'd like to thank Akamai again for sponsoring this session. Thanks to Limelight Networks for sponsoring all of Streaming Media Connect this week. And we will see you again in about a half hour for an Ask the Expert session on remote live productions. So bring your questions.